Okay, all right, so we are online. It's good to see everybody this evening. Hope you've had a good day. Are you enjoying the increasing temperatures?
No. Enjoyed yesterday.
Yeah, well, get ready. We're going to get back in the 90s for a couple of days, but fall's around the corner. Hey, just real quick, let me mention this. For those of you that are online, if you have gone to the website looking for the outline, I had no luck getting that thing to upload, so I don't have an outline out there for you. Tried several times and it just wouldn't work. I don't know what the problem is, but we'll try to get back on it, work on it tomorrow, and get something straightened out. So, all right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. It's good to see everyone, and glad that you joined us online. For those that are there on the other side of cyber world, I guess that's what we would say, and glad you're here. So let's get into our Bible study tonight. We're in Revelation chapter 18, and we're kind of continuing the theme we were on Sunday morning, which has to do with Babylon. Of course, Sunday morning we talked about the judgment of the great harlot, which has to do with religious Babylon, the religious arm of Babylon. And today we're talking about the judgment of the great city Babylon. And so we're going to get started with that here in just a moment. And so basically, three main things we're going to talk about this evening as we get into our study in Babylon. And I want to reiterate something, and that is that I said this Sunday that I'm convinced that what is being dealt with here with Babylon is that this is not intended to be just merely symbolic. Although it does symbolize and represent and speak of a spirit that has shaped and influenced the world, which we're going to talk about this evening. But I do believe that in the end times that there's going to be a rebuilding of Babylon, and Babylon's going to become the headquarters, so to speak, the capital city of Antichrist's kingdom. And I've spent a lot of time reading and studying and looking at that. And I'm convinced that that's what's going to play out. Not everybody agrees with that, but that's what I have become convinced of. So the first thing we want to talk about this evening as we get into our study of Revelation 18 is the great city as judge. And notice that we're using that terminology. We're using the term that the book of Revelation is using to talk about Babylon. And as I mentioned Sunday morning, in Revelation, anytime you hear that term great city, it's speaking of Babylon, okay? And so we're talking about the judgment of the great city of Babylon, and verses 1 through 8 gets into that subject. The great city is judged. So it begins in verse number 1 and says, after these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. Now you can just imagine what kind of angel, what that's going to be like. With this angel that is coming down from heaven, and his glory, which is really a reflection of the glory of God, is so radiant that the whole earth is illuminated by it. Verse 2, and he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, is fallen. Now notice that it's mentioned twice. Obviously, one reason for that is just for re-emphasizing the fact that God is dealing with this entity called Babylon, okay? I also believe one of the reasons why it's mentioned twice is because there are two expressions, there are two forms of Babylon that we see in Revelation 17 and 18. So last Sunday morning, we talked about one expression of it is religious Babylon. Chapter 17 is about how Babylon, remember it all goes back to Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel. When the people of the earth, post-flood, God had said to them, scatter throughout the earth and populate the earth, but they had chosen not to. They gathered in a central location there in Mesopotamia on the east side of the Euphrates River, and they constructed this tower to reach up to heaven, which really was, in many ways, a monument to themselves, to make a great name for themselves. And so one of the things that we come away with there is that Babylon becomes the mother of harlots, as we read in chapter 17. The mother, the origin of all false religion. Anything that twists the truth concerning God or just completely defies it and is nothing but just a blatant lie, but yet is being offered as an alternative to the revelation of the God of heaven and his revelation in his word, his glory, in his son, so forth and so on. All of that originates in Babylon. So the first arm, or the first expression you might say of Babylon, is religious Babylon, which we dealt with last Sunday morning. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But the other expression, and the one that is really addressed tonight in chapter 18, is what we'll call commercial Babylon. All right, we'll get more into that and help you understand more about that, okay? But anyway, he says in verse 2, "And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird." Which really what that's expressing is just giving you more of an idea of the character and the nature of Babylon. The city and the spirit of Babylon. Verse 3, "For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury." So now as we read that verse, that's kind of reminiscent of some of the things that we read Sunday morning and we looked at, about how the kings of the earth have committed fornication with the harlot, okay? Supporting, using, being used by, enriching the false religion that has been birthed by Babylon. So we see some similarities between chapter 17 and 18. And yet at the same time, they're different. Because each one of them, religious Babylon and commercial Babylon, in chapter 17 and 18, you see God's judgment upon Babylon. We saw judgment upon the harlot, religious Babylon, last Sunday because of the false and deceptive religion that has spread around the world. I mentioned Sunday morning. The whole smorgasbord of false religion that exists in the world today, of whatever slant they may be, all of them owe their origin to Babylon, Babel, Tower of Babel. And then, of course, we're going to see here today, this evening, in chapter number 18, commercial Babylon, how it has led to the world being intoxicated and addicted to materialism, money, pleasure, all those kinds of things. So here's what we're dealing with when we talk about commercial Babylon, okay? Chapter 18. Commercial Babylon envelops materialism, economics, and politics, okay? Included in that are such things as, and here's one of the things that commercial Babylon does. Commercial Babylon fuels the lust of people in the world for money, material things, profit, power, pleasure, entertainment. All of that falls under the heading of what we're talking about, commercial Babylon. Some refer to it as political Babylon, but it's all a mixture of commerce, economics, politics, materialism, all of that sort of thing. Because here's the end result of it. Most people in the world, to varying degrees, are living their life as if the purpose of life is about what is material and temporal. I mean, look at our own country. Our country is drowning in our lust for material things. Included in that is money, pleasure, all the things that go with it, houses, lands, stocks, bonds, the whole 9 yards, okay? And we look at our culture, and we're just drowning in this sea of materialism, this lust for more stuff. And here, let me ask you a question. What's one way you can describe the material world? What's the most poignant way you can describe the material world? That's part of, do what? It becomes an idol, yes. But here's the word I'm thinking of. Temporal. It's all temporal. People who are living their life for just more of the stuff that they can accumulate, all they're focused on is what's temporal. Not really thinking in terms of the larger picture that there's something beyond this life. There's something greater beyond this life. Most people in our country today really are not focused on that. And I would dare say that's pretty much where, to varying degrees, where people are around the world. So for instance, let me give you an example of how this plays out, and we see it in the New Testament, okay? The Apostle John, in 1 John chapter 2, and here's a verse of Scripture that you're very familiar with, but when you start understanding what Babylon is, and by the way, Babylon and the influence of Babylon is a present reality in our world today, and will be up until the end that we're going to be looking at, okay? Where we're going in Revelation chapter in 18 and 19, okay? And even chapter 20. But here's the verse of Scripture you're very familiar with. It's got Babylon written all over it. Listen to this. 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. Do not love the world or the things of the world, in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. Now, I want us to go back, and we're going to go back through that verse again. But this time, everywhere that where we would find the term the world, we're going to put Babylon in there. It reads like this. Do not love Babylon, or the things in Babylon. If anyone loves Babylon, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in Babylon, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of Babylon. And Babylon is passing away in the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. I mean, there you have it. So there's a verse of Scripture that we have quoted and read many, many times, but here's what that points out to us. That Babylon, what happened at the Tower of Babel? Because remember, I shared Sunday morning that what happened at the Tower of Babel, and understand something, where the Tower of Babel was built was on the east side of the Euphrates River in Mesopotamia. Essentially where today you have a city called Babylon. I've mentioned Nebuchadnezzar thought he's the reincarnation of, or Saddam Hussein thought he was the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar, and so he started building Babylon, all right? That's where it is. That's where it all started. And so what you have going on there is that, here, think about it like this. The world did not shape Babylon. The world did not give birth to Babylon. Babylon gave birth to the world. The world system did not birth Babylon. Babylon birthed the world system empowered by Satan. Now you begin to understand why this is such an important topic, and you kind of think about it. This is ultimately, as you make your way through the book of Revelation, this is part of the crescendo. It's not the ultimate crescendo, but it is really where the whole direction of Revelation, it's where the whole direction of history has been leading, of where God deals with and obliterates and rids the universe of Babylon once and for all. Okay? So when we talk about the literal destruction of the great city of Babylon, it also serves also as a reminder that all the rest of the world system, of which it is the mother that gave birth to it, it's all going as well, okay? But here's another thing too. The fact that God has so much wrath to pour out on Babylon also becomes a reminder to us to take heed to what we just read in 1 John chapter 2, verses 5 through 7 about don't love the world. If you love the world, or if you love Babylon, then the love of the Father is not in you, okay? So this whole deal about God judging and destroying Babylon and dealing with it once and for all is a reminder for us as believers to make sure that we are properly separating ourselves from the world, from Babylon. You're going to see that play out in the text tonight, okay? So, what we see in chapter 18, verses 1 through 3, what's being set in motion is God's judgment of this expression of Babylon, which we call commercial Babylon. Religious Babylon was judged in chapter 17, but if you remember, God brought judgment upon religious Babylon through the kings of the earth. Okay? The judgment was from God, but he used them. When you get to chapter 18, the judgment that comes on commercial Babylon is the direct judgment of God. He doesn't have any intermediaries that he's using. It is his direct judgment upon Babylon. Then we come to verse number 4. It says this, "And I heard another voice from heaven saying," and this is also part about the great city being judged, and this voice gives two utterances, we'll call it, okay? First is a command to the people of God. Now remember what I just said? God's judgment of Babylon should be a solemn reminder, or let's even say a solemn warning to those of us who are professed worshipers and followers of God, of Jesus, to make sure that we keep ourselves separate from Babylon. All right, you see it right here. So here's a command to the people of God, beginning of verse 4. "Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. For her sins," now listen to this statement right here, "her sins have reached to heaven." Now when they built the Tower of Babel in the land of Shinar in Genesis 11, what did they say? How high were they planning on building the tower? To reach the heavens. Well, I'm not sure how far they got there, but God put an end to that. But notice it says right here, here's what has reached heaven of Babylon. Her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. And what you have, this idea that Babylon's sins have reached heaven, it's kind of like expressing the idea of the compiled sins that are the result of Babylon's influence that have accumulated throughout the millennia and the centuries and the generations and so forth. So that kind of brings us back to this. When we started in Revelation chapter number 1, remember there's that blessing. You start off, that first beatitude in Revelation. Blessed is he who reads and they who hear the words of this prophecy and who take heed to what they hear. All right? So you think about that. So one of the blessings of that promise, that beatitude, is this, is that when we read this prophecy, the book of Revelation, and we hear the exhortations, we hear the exhortations of the tribulation saints, we hear these words right here concerning Babylon, even though this is still yet future, it's speaking to us today to beware of Babylon. Because as I said, Babylon is all around you. It's all around. The world system that we deal with day in and day out is of Babylon. And he says, come out of her. Well, who is her? Babylon, my people. Lest you share in her sins, unless you receive her plagues. And let me ask you a question. He says, lest you receive her plagues. And he's speaking to his people. So what's the implication? That God's people, if we don't take heed to this command, and we get too cozy with the world, you know, the Bible has a word for Christians that are too cozy with the world. You know what it is? Backslidden? Carnal. That's what being carnal is. Carnal is getting too cozy with the world. Carnal is letting Babylon into your life. Carnal is when a Christian gets in the bed with Babylon. And I don't mean necessarily literally, but figuratively, spiritually speaking. Because remember, we've talked about that. They've committed fornication. And most of the fornication that's being talked about here, some may be actual little physical sexual immorality, but some of the fornication that's being talked about is, in fact, probably most of it, is spiritual fornication. And so, when we hear this prophecy and we read and we take it to heart, you know what and I can't remember right now the text, this just comes to my mind. I wish I thought about this earlier. Do you not know what one of the purposes and benefits of why God gives us prophecy, why he shows us these things, and not just revelation, but other things that we find in prophecy about what is ahead and what to expect and anticipate? Do you know what the end result is supposed to be in the life of a believer with prophecy? It's supposed to produce purity in our life. Because prophecy is telling us that God is bringing judgment upon a godless world, and if you're a believer, you don't want to get tainted by that. So it encourages you to keep your life pure, keep your life clean. I like what Johnny Hunt always says, stay close and clean. That's what prophecy ought to do and produce in the life of it ought to encourage us to stay close and clean. So here's the thing, where it says, come out from among her. It talks about the fact that, listen, yes, guess what? As the Bible says, we are in the world, right? But we're not to be what? Of the world. What does that mean, we're not to be of the world? We're not to be too cozy and comfortable with the things of the world. There are some things, and listen, that doesn't mean, here's the problem. Most of us probably grew up in an age and under a lot of preachers that preach like this. If it's fun, it's sinful. Right? As if God is some, big party pooper and doesn't ever want his people to have fun and enjoy life, all right? So not everything that is in the world necessarily is wrong. Most of the time it has a lot to do with how it's used, how it's practiced, all right? There was a time when we were told, if you go to that movie theater, you're going to hell. Anybody ever heard that? Oh, yeah, boy, you better not go dancing, you're going to hell. I like to dance. I got a granddaughter. I can't wait to start going to dances with her. I'm going to cut a rug.
I used to hear if you play cards.
Yeah, if you play cards, absolutely. Listen, let me tell you, here's what it's dealing with is this. When you talk about all that sort of thing about, okay, so what does it mean? And he says, come out and be separate. What does that mean?
We're to be different.
Exactly, we're to be different. And why are we different? Here's the reason why we're different. Because we are living for and serving and seeking a different kingdom. We are living by the values of that kingdom. And because we are seeking and living for another kingdom and living by the values of a different kingdom, then we live and behave differently than the world. And you want to know something? To be separate doesn't mean that you can't have any lost friends. The fact of the matter is you need lost friends. How else in the world are we going to influence them? Jesus ate with sinners and publicans, and he got criticized for it. So the idea is not that we're so separate means isolation, quarantine. It just means that we live by a different set of values and for a different kingdom, and that results in how we live differently. That's what it means to be separate. And by doing that, then we fulfill what Jesus said. In Matthew chapter 5, you become salt and light. And what did Jesus say? Let your light so shine that they may see your good works and glorify your Father that is in heaven. That's the idea of being separate. So we have, as we make our way through this judgment of the great city, we have this command to God's people, but then in verses 6 through 8, we have an affirmation of God's judgment of the great city. And I have to tell you up front that these verses, and I find this so often, that, you know, and you've heard me say this before, what goes around comes around. I find that in so many places in Scripture. This is one of them. Listen to what it says right here. This is the angel, that great angel that with glorious light that illuminates the entire earth, says, render to her, and who is her? Babylon. Render to her just as she rendered. Now, most English translations, many say to you. The best translations read like this: render to her just as she rendered. In other words, what's another way of saying that? Give back to her as she gave to you. All right? And repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mixed, mix double for her. In other words, she's mixed a cup of godliness and filthiness and greed and wrong influence and all that goes along with Babylon and so forth. So mix a cup for her of judgment, but mix double. Okay? Verse 7. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen. I am exalted. I am untouchable. I am no widow. I'm not helpless. I'm not unable to defend myself. I'm a queen. I'm no widow, and I will not see sorrow. Therefore, her plagues will come in one day. That means that God's destruction is going to happen in a day. Death and mourning and famine. And she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her. And so you see very clearly in that the biblical teaching. Pride goes before the fall. I put it like this: the judgment of commercial Babylon with this arrogance, this hubris that she expresses towards God and God's judgment and so forth, is the ultimate fulfillment of Jesus' words in Matthew 7:2. And he said this: with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Like I said, what goes around comes around. Then we come to verses 9 through 20. And we see here the great city is mourned. Now you got to think, commercial Babylon, money, profit, power, influence, all that goes along with that sort of stuff. And so here's what I want you to notice in these verses. I want you to notice the ones who are said to mourn, lament the destruction of the fall of commercial Babylon. Verse number 9 says, the kings of the earth. So when you think about the kings of the earth, what does that represent? What do the kings of the earth represent?
Nations, different nations.
Nations.
Leaders of those nations.
Rulers. Wealthy could be included, and wealthy would even be included in what we'll talk about in just a moment. Power brokers. Okay? The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will keep and lament for her. And so the idea here is this: Remember, what did John say? All that is in the world is what? All that is in the Babylonian system of the world is what? The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. These kings, for the sake of power and influence, committed fornication, spiritual fornication with her, so that through manipulating and using the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, to rule people, they will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, the great city of Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And that's a confirmation of what we read just a moment ago. It's going to come in one day. Here they say it came in 1 hour. It comes in 1 hour. So we see the kings of the earth, the powerful, power brokers, rulers. Verse 11, and the merchants of the earth. Literally, that word merchant means tradesman. Okay? So when you think about the merchants of the earth, what would we use today to describe who are the merchants of the earth? All right, greedy CEOs. All right. Sellers, business people, sellers of good, and in this sense, global. We're in the global economy, all right? You got to think about that. Multinational corporations, all those kinds of things. You kind of get the idea what's going on there. You're going to even hear in a minute about the seamen. So that means that you've got the seafarers, ships, transporting these goods that make these merchants wealthy back and forth around the world. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. So you get an idea, all right? So remember, Satan's got, or the Antichrist has got an economic system, right? What's it called? Mark of the beast. Okay? Guess what is, I'm not going to ask, all right? Guess where that economic system is headquartered? His capital. Now that system's gone, it's done. And we see the result. No one buys their merchandise anymore because Babylon has fallen. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood. That's a fragrant wood used to develop other things. Could be that it's used to have developed very fine fragrances. You know, some of these French perfumes that cost a bunch of money that stink to high heaven. Every Please don't bring me any back. I don't need anything from Perry. I appreciate it. Every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon, and incense, fragrant oil, frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, chariots, and bodies and souls of men, slaves. Isn't that interesting? Selling bodies and souls of men. Boy, isn't that interesting? Listen to verse 14. The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you. Talking about these merchants, okay? The gig is up. But it says the fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you. So what do you think is the fruit that they longed for? What was the whole point of all this selling and buying and trading? Money. Money. Makes me think of that song of the OJs. Money, money, money. Money.
You know, I can't help but think of Amazon. Jeff Bezos, not saying but he's out here buying yachts, airplanes, and he's, selling things all over the world.
Yeah.
And the world it's not there to buy them.
Yeah. So for those of you online, the point made was that you think about today, like Jeff Bezos, Amazon, so forth and so on. I mean that is a good picture of the kind of network that you're talking about, and the wealth and the power and all that goes with it. But when you get to this point, as I said, the gig's over. Okay? So you can kind of get an idea of why they're just so devastated when they look at this. And here's the thing, that yes, the motive of it behind it all is money and what comes with money, which has to do with power, influence, and then of course pleasure and luxury and all those kinds of things and so forth. But we got to be reminded, it's not money, it's not the money that is evil. It's as the Bible tells us in 1 Timothy 6:10, it is the love of money that is the root of all evil. Because what happens is when we fall in love with money, we'll do anything to get it. When you fall in love with money, I mean, you can take this idea in the picture like, you fall in love with a person, fall in love with your spouse, so forth, fall in love with a girlfriend, all this kind of thing, you get crazy. Seriously. When people fall in love with money, they get crazy. And there are no lines of what they will do for it. So it's the love of money. And so the thing that is evil when it comes to money is our lusting for it, our coveting for it, our ungodly use of it, our willingness, not everyone, but our willingness, if we go too far with it, to do anything to get money. That's the whole problem. And that's really kind of what we see being uncovered in this text right here. So it says, verse 14, the fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you. And you shall find them no more at all. The merchants of these things, who became rich by her, will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing and saying, alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple, scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, this is where the seafarers come in, every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what is like this great city? Verse 19, and they threw dust on their heads and cried out. So obviously, we're looking at yet something still forward beyond the 21st century. And these are not Jews, more than likely. Some of them, some might be, some aren't. But here they are doing an Old Testament kind of thing of throwing dust on their head and mourning, weeping and wailing, saying, alas, alas, that great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. Again, second time it's confirmed for us, 1 hour. And remember what I said, as opposed to what God did with religious Babylon in chapter 17, where he worked through the kings of the earth to bring that down, here God is dealing with it firsthand directly. And so verses 9 through 19 reflect, if you would, the sentiment of the children and the benefactors of Babylon's fall, or of Babylon's wealth. And of course, this is their sentiment when they see the fall of commercial Babylon. But look at verse 20. Verse 20 reflects the sentiment of heaven and heaven's offspring at the fall of Babylon. Verse 20 says this, rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets. Now, where do you think the holy apostles and prophets are going to be at this time? They're in heaven, okay? But somehow even in heaven, they're going to be aware of what's going on. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. And so remember what we've talked about, in Revelation chapter 6, I think verse 9 and 10, the fifth seal, the martyrs under the altar. How long, O Lord? Well, we're seeing here really the ultimate how long is at the end of the tribulation, war of Armageddon, the great white throne judgment. But the thing about it is an absolute given and definite that it does take place. So then verses, I didn't change my outline here. Verses 21 through 24, the great city is eulogized. Now, let me ask you a question. So when you hear that term eulogy, what tends to come to your mind? If you were asked to give a eulogy for someone, what would be the character, the nature of what you would say? What would you do? Do what? You've kind of, actually the word eulogy means praise, quite honestly. So it means typically the idea of a eulogy is to talk about a person's life and you talk about the good things, the positive things about them and so forth and so on, all right? If today, so I went and I actually looked up, because I didn't know if I wanted to use the term eulogy or not. Because you think about this, eulogy of Babylon, really? So I did some research. So I went and I did some research on the definition of eulogy. Here's what I found. The first and most common can be a commemorative inscription on a tombstone or monument, but that's also what we would call an epitaph. Okay? Secondly, the second one is more along the lines of what we think of. A speech or written passage composed in commemoration of a dead person, obviously emphasizing the good things, positive things about them. But as I went on and I continued to look, and those two definitions are close to what we typically think of as what a eulogy would be. But the Brits, the Brits. You can always count on the Brits to come up with something different. They have one more piece of the definition. And the Brits have a definition of eulogy as this. Now listen to this. A final judgment on a person or thing. Can be good, can be bad. When I found that, I thought, that's the word I want. Okay? So I want you to, so we're going to read verses 21 through 24. And as we do, I want you to listen to this. Listen for a particular pattern theme that is expressed here. Okay? Verse 21. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down. Okay, so you get the picture of throwing a great millstone into the sea, giving a picture of great Babylon being thrown down and shall not be found anymore. So let me ask you a question. So if you were out on a boat, you've got a large millstone, a large stone, a block, whatever. If you toss that thing overboard, what's going to happen to it? Sink to the bottom. And the idea being to be seen no more, right? Just make sure that brick's not attached to somebody's foot, okay? Verse 22. The sound, so it says, and shall not be found anymore. So just as that millstone would never be seen or found anymore, Babylon no longer to be found. Verse 22. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you anymore. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you anymore. And the sound of a millstone, oddly enough, shall not be heard in you anymore. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you anymore, and the voice of bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you anymore. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived, and in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and of all who were slain on the earth. And so you think about all of history, all through the course of history, and all these things happening. Prophets killed, the saints of God killed, Here's what God's saying. At the heart, at the root of it all was Babylon. Remember, the world didn't give shape to Babylon. Babylon, under the power of Satan, gave shape to the world. You understand why this is such a critical thing at this point in Revelation. Now, so I ask you to kind of watch for pattern, okay? Remember the game show, Name That Tune?
Oh, sure.
I think you could get up to 7 notes, maybe is what it was. I can name that tune in 2 notes, 3 notes. I can name it in 1. All right, so I'm going to ask you to name that tune. Based on the theme of what we were reading just a minute ago, out of those verses, based on the themes that are mentioned and the repetitive terminology that's used in that eulogy, can you come up with an epitaph for Babylon? You know, just a short saying that would describe Babylon based upon that eulogy. You see anything?
I thought you were better than God, but you were not.
Here today, gone tomorrow.
All right, here's some that anybody else want to give it a shot?
Gone in a flash.
Gone in a flash.
Everything you thought you were is gone.
Here's what I came up with. No more. Babylon is no more. Not found anymore. Not heard anymore. You kind of get the idea. Of course, the thing about it is, there's not going to be a tombstone to put it on.
We just say the end.
The end. Notice also that with this being his capital, there's no mention of Antichrist here. Where is he?
Yeah.
With the millstone.
Not yet with the millstone. Not yet with the millstone. They didn't know. So think about it. All right, think about where we are. Think about where we are in Revelation. What's the next chapter? Yeah, chapter 19. You've got the coming of the Lord and you've got the war of Armageddon take place. Where's he at? He's headed toward or in the valley of Jezreel around Megiddo that we talked about last week, where the conflict is going to take place. Just imagine if you're Antichrist and you get word, guess what? Babylon is no more.
Don't answer your cell phone.
Yeah, you won't find your cell phone there, will you?
Well, don't answer either.
All right, any questions? Okay. All right, with that, we shall conclude. We will wrap up. Sunday morning, we will be in Revelation chapter 19. All right, thank you for joining us online.